Welcome to Flagstone Trail's Deep Dive Review Series on the design of everyday things.
Yes.
This deep dive is all about helping you,
Yeah.
the top bitch product managers, apply Don Norman's principles
Okay.
to the real-life situations you face every day.
It's amazing how relevant this book still is, even decades after it was first published.
Yeah.
The tech landscape has changed dramatically,
Yeah.
but the fundamentals of human psychology and design remain the same.
Exactly. So let's dive right into Chapter 1,
Okay.
The Psychopathology of Everyday Things. It kicks off with this hilarious story
Okay.
about Norman struggling with a badly designed door. He couldn't figure out whether to push or pull,
Wow.
and it turned out the door had been designed with conflicting cues, both a handle and a push plate.
It's a perfect example of how even seemingly simple designs can fail
Right.
if they don't provide clear affordances.
Yeah.
And think about how this applies to the digital products we work on. How many times have you seen an app or website with buttons that don't look clickable?
All the time.
Or forms with unclear instructions?
All the time. And those are missed opportunities to guide the user.
Right.
And create a smooth, intuitive experience. Norman talks about the importance of understanding mental models.
Yes.
Those internal representations that users have of how things work.
And if our designs clash with those mental models,
Right.
we create friction and frustration.
Yeah.
Think about the classic example of a digital slider control.
Go ahead.
Most users expect that swiping right will increase the value.
Yeah.
But I've seen some apps where it works the opposite way.
Right.
That's a recipe for confusion.
Definitely. It's like those volume sliders that go up and down instead of left and right.
Yeah.
Just because you understand how it works doesn't mean your user will. And this leads to another key concept from Chapter 1.
Yeah.
Feedback.
Users need to know that their actions have had the desired effect. And in the digital world, this becomes even more critical.
Yeah.
Think about submitting a form online.
Okay.
If there's no loading indicator or
Right.
confirmation message,
Yeah.
how do you know if the form went through?
You end up hitting submit multiple times,
Right.
wondering if it's working,
Yeah.
which can lead to duplicate submissions or even errors.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've done that.
It's a common problem, and it highlights the need for clear, timely feedback
Yes.
in every aspect of our design.
From subtle animations
Yes.
to explicit confirmation messages,
Right.
those feedback mechanisms make a world of difference.
They give the user a sense of control and confidence,
Yeah.
which ultimately leads to a more positive experience. And for product managers, that translates to higher engagement, lower churn rates, and a stronger brand reputation.
Okay, let's move on to Chapter 2.
Okay.
The Psychology of Everyday Actions. This is where Norman introduces his famous 7 stages of action.
Which sounds a bit academic at first, but it's actually a brilliant framework for understanding how users approach tasks.
Yeah.
It starts with forming a goal,
Okay.
then planning the action,
Yeah.
specifying the sequence of steps,
Okay.
executing those steps,
Got it.
perceiving the state of the world,
Okay.
interpreting the results,
Okay.
and finally evaluating the outcome.
It seems like a lot for something as simple as making a cup of coffee, but
But when you break it down,
yeah.
you realize that even simple actions involve a complex interplay of cognitive processes.
Right.
And as product managers,
Yeah.
we need to be aware of these stages so we can design products that support users at each step.
So instead of just throwing a bunch of features at users and expecting them to figure it out,
Right.
we need to think carefully about the user journey and design each step to be as intuitive and effortless as possible.
Exactly. And that leads to the concept of the gulfs of execution and evaluation,
Okay.
which are two of the biggest challenges we face in design.
Okay, remind me what those are again.
The gulf of execution is the gap between what the user wants to do
Okay.
and what the system allows them to do.
Right.
It's that feeling of, how do I make this thing do what I want?
Like when you encounter a confusing interface
Right.
and you can't figure out how to find the feature you're looking for.
Exactly. And the gulf of evaluation is the gap
Okay.
between what the system does
Okay.
and what the user understands.
Okay.
It's that feeling
Yeah.
of, did this thing actually do what I wanted it to do?
So it's about bridging the gap between the user's intentions
Yes.
and the system's capabilities.
Right.
both in terms of execution and evaluation.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that's where good design comes in.
Right.
We need to make the intended actions clear and discoverable.
Okay.
Provide clear feedback at every step,
Mm-hmm.
and anticipate potential errors so we can prevent them or make recovery as painless as possible.
I'm starting to see how these concepts can be applied to all sorts of product management challenges.
Absolutely. For example, let's say you're designing a new feature for a financial app.
Okay.
You could use the 7 stages of action to map out the user journey, identify potential pain points, and design the interface in a way that minimizes the gulfs of execution and evaluation.
That's a great example. You could also use the concept of feedback to design confirmation messages that reassure users that their transactions have been processed successfully.
Absolutely.
Or use the concept of mental models to design the interface in a way that aligns with users' existing expectations of how a financial act should work.
Exactly. And don't forget about error prevention. You could use constraints to prevent users from making common mistakes. Like entering invalid data or transferring money to the wrong account.
This is making me think about how often we jump into building features without fully considering these psychological aspects of the user experience. We're so focused on the what that we forget about the how.
That's a common pitfall.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to have a strong understanding of human psychology and design principles. It's not just about making things look pretty or function flawlessly. It's about creating products that are truly user-centered. And solve real problems for real people.
And that brings us to the concept of learned helplessness. Which Norman discusses towards the end of Chapter 2.
This is a fascinating concept, and it has huge implications for product design. Norman argues that when people repeatedly encounter poorly designed objects or systems, they start to believe they are incapable of using technology effectively.
It's like that feeling of frustration and defeat you get. When you can't figure out how to use a simple gadget. You start to question your own intelligence and abilities.
And the worst part is, this learned helplessness can generalize to other areas of life.
Oh, wow.
People might start to avoid technology altogether because they believe they're just not good with computers or too old to learn new things.
As product managers, we have a responsibility to break this cycle.
I agree.
Our products should empower users, not make them feel helpless.
Exactly. We need to design products that are intuitive, forgiving, and provide clear feedback so users feel a sense of accomplishment and mastery rather than frustration and defeat.
So we've covered affordances, mental models, feedback, 7 stages of action, the goals of execution and evaluation, and learned helplessness. That's a lot to unpack from just the first 2 chapters.
It is, but these are foundational concepts that will serve you well throughout your career as a product manager. They'll help you understand your users better, design more effective products, and ultimately create a more human-centered world.
Okay. Sounds good.
Let's welcome back to our deep dive into the design of everyday things. We've just scratched the surface of Norman's brilliant insights, and now we're moving into chapters 3 and 4, where we explore how knowledge plays a role in design.
Yes. In Chapter 3, Knowledge in the Head and in the World, Norman challenges us to think about where knowledge resides and how that impacts user experience. It's a balancing act between what users need to remember, knowledge in the head, and what the design itself can communicate knowledge in the world.
This resonates with so many product challenges. For example, think about password requirements. We want strong security. So we ask users to create complex passwords with numbers, symbols, the whole 9 yards. But that puts a huge burden on knowledge in the head.
Exactly. Users end up resorting to sticky notes.
Or worse, using the same weak password across multiple platforms. As product managers, we need to find ways to make security usable. Password managers are a great example of shifting knowledge into the world. But even simple things like clear password strength meters can help users make better choices without having to memorize complex rules.
So it's about designing systems that support rather than burden the user's memory. Norman uses the example of a stovetop where the burner controls don't match the layout of the burners.
I've seen that.
Every time you use it, you have to remember which knob goes with which burner. Frustrating.
A classic case of poor mapping that forces reliance on knowledge in the head.
Right.
A well-designed stovetop, however, would provide clear visual cues that link each control to its corresponding burner.
Right.
You wouldn't need to remember anything.
Right.
The information would be right there in the world.
This makes me think about navigation within a complex app. If users constantly get lost and have to retrace their steps, it's a sign that we haven't provided enough knowledge in the world.
Think about breadcrumbs, intuitive menus, or even a visual sitemap. These can all act as cues to help users orient themselves and understand where they are within the system. We need to design our digital spaces to be as navigable as a well-planned city.
Another key concept from Chapter 3 is the power of constraints. Constraints can actually be helpful because they limit the possibilities and guide users toward the desired action.
Think about those online forms that have drop-down menus or radio buttons instead of free text fields. These constraints not only reduce errors, but also make it clear to the user what kind of input is expected.
And those constraints aren't just for data entry. They can guide users through an entire process. Take a multi-step checkout flow, for example, by strategically enabling or disabling buttons based on the user's progress. You create a clear path and prevent them from skipping steps or going back in a way that might break the flow.
It's like those physical mazes for children, where you can only go in one direction. The constraints are designed to guide you to the end goal.
Exactly. And speaking of guiding users, Norman also emphasizes the importance of reminders. In our world of constant notifications, it's easy to dismiss reminders as annoying pop-ups, but
they can be incredibly powerful when used thoughtfully. Think about a project management tool that sends reminders about upcoming deadlines, or a calendar app that prompts you to prepare for a meeting. These aren't just nagging you. They're providing timely cues to help you stay on track and avoid missing important events.
And from a product management perspective, well-designed reminders can reduce churn and increase engagement. If your app helps users achieve their goals by providing the right nudges at the right time, they're more likely to stick around.
Absolutely. Now, Chapter 4, knowing what to do, builds on these ideas and dives deeper into the different types of constraints that can be used in design. Norman categorizes them as physical, semantic, cultural, and logical.
That seems like a lot of constraints. Can you break those down for us?
Of course. Physical constraints are the most obvious. They literally prevent certain actions. Think about a key that can only be inserted into a lock one way, or a USB plug that only fits in a specific orientation.
So in the digital world, physical constraints might be something like a button that's grayed out until a certain condition is met, making it physically impossible to click.
Exactly. Then there are semantic constraints, which rely on our understanding of the meaning of the situation. Norman uses the example of assembling a Lego motorcycle. You wouldn't put the rider's head on backwards, even though the pieces might fit, because it wouldn't make sense semantically.
So it's about leveraging users' common sense and understanding of the world to guide their actions.
Exactly.
And how does this apply to digital design?
Think about the icons we use in our apps. We rely on users' understanding of the semantic meaning of those icons to communicate functionality. A trash can icon means delete. A magnifying glass means search. If we use an icon that doesn't have a clear semantic meaning, it's going to create confusion.
That makes perfect sense. What about cultural constraints?
Cultural constraints rely on learned conventions. For example, in many cultures, red means stop and green means go. This is so ingrained in our understanding that we don't even have to think about it. We just react instinctively.
So how can we leverage cultural constraints in design?
Think about the use of color in your interface. If you use red for a primary call to action button, it might send the wrong message culturally, even if it looks visually appealing. Or think about date and time formats. Different cultures have different conventions, and it's important to design your app to accommodate those differences.
That's a great point. We often overlook these cultural nuances. But they can have a big impact on the user experience. Okay, last but not least, what are logical constraints?
Logical constraints use reasoning to deduce the proper course of action. For example, if you're filling out a form that asks for your age, you can't enter a negative number or a number greater than 120. It just wouldn't be logically possible.
So it's about designing systems that follow the rules of logic and common sense.
Exactly.
And how does this apply to digital design?
Think about the way you structure your forms. Or the flow of your application. Make sure the steps are presented in a logical order. And that users can easily understand the relationships between different elements. Don't make them jump through hoops. Or guess what they're supposed to do next.
It's about creating a clear and coherent path for the user. Guided by the principles of logic and reason.
Exactly. And when you combine these different types of constraints, physical, semantic, cultural, and logical, you create a powerful framework for guiding user behavior and making your products more intuitive and easy to use.
I love how Norman takes something as seemingly simple as a constraint and breaks it down into these different categories, showing how each type plays a unique role in shaping the user experience. It's so insightful.
It is, and it's a reminder that good design is all about attention to detail. It's about thinking carefully about how users will interact with your product.
And using every tool at your disposal to guide them towards their goals.
We're starting to see a theme emerge here. Good design is about understanding human psychology. Anticipating user needs. And providing the right cues and constraints to guide behavior. It's about making the complex seem simple.
Exactly. And speaking of complexity, let's move on to Chapter 5, where Norman tackles the inevitable topic of human error.
Welcome back to Flagstone Trail's exploration of the design of everyday things. We've delved into affordances, mental models, the power of constraints. But as any product manager knows, sometimes things still go wrong. That's where Chapter 5, To Err is Human, comes in.
It's a chapter that should resonate with anyone who's ever shipped a product, only to realize users are doing things you never anticipated. Norman reframes our perspective on errors. They're not just user failings, but opportunities to understand where our design has fallen short. He starts by making a distinction between slips and mistakes. Can you remind us of the difference?
A slip is an error of execution. You intend to do the right thing, but you mess up the action. Think about accidentally clicking the wrong button or mistyping a password. A mistake, on the other hand, is an error of intention. You have the wrong goal in mind, leading you down the wrong path.
So it's like a slip is when you know what you want to do, but your fingers betray you. A mistake is when you're fundamentally misunderstanding the task. Or the system. This distinction seems crucial for how we approach error handling in our products.
Absolutely. If it's a slip, we can design interfaces that minimize those slips' clear button placement, confirmation dialogues before critical actions, autocorrect features that catch typos. But for mistakes, it's about providing clearer instructions, better feedback, and making sure the conceptual model of our product is truly understandable.
And that ties back to those gulfs of execution and evaluation. I talked about earlier. If a user makes a mistake because they don't understand how the system works, we need to bridge that gulf of execution by making the intended actions more obvious.
And if they make a mistake because they misinterpret the feedback they're getting, we need to bridge the gulf of evaluation by making the system's state more transparent. Norman uses the example of those confusing ATM interfaces. Where it's not clear whether your transaction has been processed or not. The lack of feedback leads to user error and anxiety.
We've all been there.
Yes.
Standing at the ATM. Frantically checking our balance to make sure we didn't accidentally withdraw twice the amount. It's a design fail that could easily be solved with a simple confirmation message. But Norman goes beyond just identifying errors. He offers strategies for designing systems that are more forgiving.
One of his key concepts is forcing functions, those design elements, that prevent errors from happening in the first place. Think about those safety features on power tools that require you to press 2 buttons simultaneously to activate the blade, preventing accidental starts.
And while we can't always incorporate physical constraints into digital products, we can use similar forcing functions to guide user behavior.
Exactly. Think about those required fields in a form that prevent users from submitting incomplete data. Or those confirmation dialogues that ask, are you sure you want to delete this file before performing an irreversible action? These forcing functions act as safety nets, catching potential errors before they occur.
It's like that quote, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Designing for error prevention saves everyone time and frustration in the long run. Now, even with the best designs, errors will happen. That's where good error messaging becomes crucial. Instead of those cryptic error codes that only a developer could understand. We need messages that are clear, concise, and helpful. Tell the user what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how to fix it.
And don't underestimate the power of tone. A friendly, empathetic error message can go a long way in diffusing a frustrating situation. Imagine encountering an error message that says something like, oops, looks like something went wrong. Let's try that again. It immediately puts the user at ease.
It shifts the blame from the user to the system, acknowledging that sometimes things just don't go as planned. It's a subtle but important distinction. Now, in Chapter 6, the design challenge, Norman zooms out and looks at the bigger picture of design. He acknowledges that we don't always have complete control over the design process, especially in the complex world of product development.
He talked about the various constraints that designers face. Budget limitations, tight deadlines, demanding stakeholders who might prioritize aesthetics over usability, and the ever-present pressure to add more features, even when those features might compromise the overall user experience.
It's the classic battle between creeping featureism and elegant simplicity. As product managers, we're often caught in the middle of this struggle. How do we advocate for good design when faced with these competing pressures?
It's not easy, but it's crucial. We need to be able to articulate the value of good design. Not just in terms of user satisfaction, but also in terms of business outcomes.
We need to show how a well-designed product can reduce support costs, increase customer loyalty, and ultimately drive revenue growth. It's about framing good design as an investment, not an expense.
And that's where data can be a powerful ally. If you can show how usability testing led to a decrease in error rates or an increase in conversion rates, you're speaking the language that stakeholders understand.
It's about building a business case for good design, backed up by solid evidence. Norman also highlights the importance of designing for diverse users. We need to consider users of different ages, abilities, cultural background, and tech savviness.
It's about creating products that are inclusive and accessible to everyone, not just a narrow demographic. This might mean offering multiple ways to interact with the product, providing clear and concise instructions, or designing for users with disabilities.
It's about recognizing that there's no such thing as the average user. We need to design for the edges, not just the center. And finally, in Chapter 7, User-Centered Design, Norman brings all of these ideas together and presents his 7 fundamental principles for creating products that are truly human-centered.
These principles are like a roadmap for good design. And while we've touched on most of them already, it's worth revisiting them in this context.
Let's run through them one by one. Principle number 1. Use both knowledge in the world and knowledge in the head.
This means finding the right balance between what users need to remember and what the design itself can communicate. Don't overload users with too much information, but also don't make them rely solely on their memory. Provide clear cues, labels, and instructions that make the system's state and functionality transparent.
Principle number 2. Simplify the structure of tasks.
Break down complex tasks into smaller, more manageable steps. Make it clear to the user what needs to be done at each stage, and provide guidance along the way. Don't overwhelm them with too many options or make them jump through unnecessary hoops.
Principle number 3. Make things visible.
This is about making the system's conceptual model clear to the user. Show them how things work, what their options are, and what the consequences of their actions will be. Don't hide important information or make users guess how to use the system.
Principle number 4, get the mappings right.
Ensure that the relationship between controls and their effects is intuitive and easy to understand. Use clear labels, visual cues, and spatial relationships to help users understand how to control the system.
Principle number 5. Exploit the power of constraints.
Use constraints to guide user behavior and prevent errors. This might involve physical constraints, like disabling buttons or graying out options. Or it might involve semantic, cultural, or logical constraints that leverage users' understanding of the world.
Principle number 6. Design for error.
Assume that users will make mistakes and design your system to be as forgiving as possible. Provide clear error messages that explain what went wrong and how to fix it. Use forcing functions to prevent errors in the first place.
And finally, principle number 7. When all else fails, standardize.
If there's no clear best solution, at least be consistent. Use familiar conventions and patterns that users will recognize from other systems. Don't reinvent the wheel or create unnecessary learning curves.
These 7 principles are like a toolkit for creating user-centered designs. They're not rigid rules, but rather a set of guidelines that can be applied flexibly to a wide range of design challenges.
And they remind us that good design is not just about aesthetics or functionality. It's about creating products that are intuitive, enjoyable, and empowering for the user.
It's about making the world a little bit better.
I agree.
One well-designed product at a time.
And that's what makes The Design of Everyday Things such a timeless and inspiring book. It challenges us to think differently about the world around us and to use our skills as designers and product managers to create a more human-centered future.
Well, I think we've successfully navigated the maze of Don Norman's brilliant insights.
And we have.
This has been an incredible journey through the principles of good design and their application in the real world of product management. We've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully you're walking away with a deeper understanding of how to create products that are not only functional, but also delightful and empowering for your users. And that's it for today's Flagstone Trail discussion. We appreciate your listenership.